I'm J. Brent Eaton with Power, Love, and Miracles, and thank you for joining me for part 3 of What is the Soul? In this series, we investigate how God designed the human soul and how by knowing that we can apply these principles and this design to our everyday life to make a tremendous difference in the way that we live. If you have not had the opportunity to do so, I would encourage you to view lessons 1 and 2, but also please subscribe to this channel. That way we can notify you whenever new lessons come online. In this lesson, we're looking at the responsive soul. In lesson 1, we did an introduction and looked at the diagram of the human soul. Last week, we looked at the most basic level of the soul, which is the energetic soul, and this is your physical body and the movement of energy within your body. This week, we're looking at the responsive soul, which is your emotional self. I usually start with things to ponder. These are going to be the discussion questions at the end, and I want to start with those so you'll know what to think about as we go through this lesson. What discussion topics bring up emotions in people? Are there topics you can talk about that bring up really strong emotions for people, or have you noticed that in your life? How does your physical state affect your emotions? And what does or doesn't make sense about the gut-brain concept? And that's a concept we'll be introducing today. The focal passage for this lesson is love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. In this passage, Jesus has revealed to us the 5 different dimensions of the soul. So it shows us that not only was this in Genesis when God created the soul, but it continues on throughout the Bible and in the thought process of Jesus as he described who we are. We're going to start with non-conscious thought, and the energetic and the responsive level of the soul are almost completely non-conscious. What that means is it's happening, things are going on, but you're not aware of that. With your physical body, there are a lot of processes that are going on you're not aware of. The movement of blood, the beating of your heart, creation of new cells. You're not aware of that, but it happens, so that's non-conscious. And also, too, there are a lot of processes and subroutines that you use on a daily basis. We call these habits, that help you make life easier. So you don't have to think about each and every detail of all the things you do. You can just do it without having to expend emotional energy. But our conscious mind, the part we're aware of, is very limited. Your conscious mind can only process about 60 bits of information per second. The computer that I'm using to record this can process 2.4 billion bits of information per second. And your body is receiving 11 million bits per second, but can only process 60. So there's a whole lot going on in you that you're not aware of. And some of those things you don't need to be aware of because it's an automatic thing happening in your body, is inconsequential details happening around you, so you're not aware of that. I want to demonstrate what a limited amount of information this is by using a photograph. This is a car in space. I love astronomy. I just think this is fascinating. So this is Brent going off on a tangent. But let's say that this picture represents the 11 million bits of information that your body is receiving at any second. You can't process or understand that much. All you can do is process this much. Everything else is not available to you. And it's usually not important, but it's not available to you because you can't focus on too much all at once. In non-conscious processing, a lot of things are going on here that are important to keep you from being overloaded and overwhelmed. That 60 bits of information per second that you can process is on a good day. If you're feeling good, you're not stressed out, but if you're in a crisis, in an emergency, it all focuses down on the immediate crisis. We call it tunnel vision. You forget everything else around you. And I've seen that happen in taking care of people who are grieving, who've lost a loved one. They forget details. They don't do things they're supposed to do. They don't remember people saying things because they're so focused on the immediate crisis that they can't process any more than that. So you're very limited. But the way this works is your body receives and filters information and sends the important information to your conscious mind for conscious processing. Right now, as you're viewing this and hearing my voice, your brain is tricking you into thinking that everything you see around you, you're seeing now. But what's happening is your brain is actually filling in that information so it doesn't have to process that again. So it's tricking you into thinking you're seeing everything and you're not. That's why if you walk into your house and something is out of place, you may not notice it until later on when you actually focus on it. You say, well, this wasn't here before. Well, your brain tricked you into thinking it was there because it was unimportant information at the time. But your mind sends the really important information to your consciousness, your conscious mind, so that you can use it. The rest of the information is stored in many parts of your body, because we think of the body as the soul and the mind. But what can happen is if you have a trauma or something difficult in your life, you may store that information in a particular part of your body and at some point cause you distress and pain. We know that a lot of pain management has a spiritual and emotional component to it. And if people can release the emotions and the trauma and the difficulty of those memories, the pain will go away. We also have experienced, too, people that lose a lot of weight. As their weight's going down and those cells start to deteriorate, it releases the chemicals that were stored during the trauma, and now they're having memories and feelings that they haven't had in a long time. And that's what's causing it. Your body is actually storing that information. Another thing your mind does is make sense out of things that don't immediately make sense. A lot of processing goes on to try to put order and pattern to the things that you see. In this instance, the first and last letters of each word are in the right place. The other letters are slightly out of place. But after a moment, you can start to figure out what these words mean, and by the end of the sentence, it's not hard at all, because your brain is in the background rearranging the information to tell you what this actually means. It's giving meaning to the information coming to you. And what I said previously is the energetic level of the soul receives information but doesn't put any meaning or judgment on it. And so the higher levels of processing are the ones that are doing this. So when you see this after a few minutes, you realize it says, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. So you can start seeing this and being able to go through this and realize that, yeah, your brain can make sense of this after a moment. We'll recap the 5 dimensions, so we'll see how the responsive soul fits in this diagram. The 5 rings represent the 5 dimensions of the soul, and starting at the bottom is the energetic soul, and that is your physical self, your transmission of energy within your body. The next one, the orange ring, is responsive. This is emotional and responds and reacts to stimuli that your body receives, and this is the one we'll be focusing on today. The yellow ring is the integrative level of the soul, and this communicates intrapersonally, meaning within you, and interpersonally with other people to process information, to share information, and to be sure that your soul and your relationship with the other person is in stasis, is working well. And if you'll notice that the yellow ring touches the other 4, and this harmonizes and brings synchronicity to the rest of the soul. The green ring is the psychogenic level of the soul, and this is what scientists traditionally call the mind. Most of this is conscious processing and thinking and memories. The blue ring is your spiritual self. This is actually not part of space and time as we understand it, because your spirit is timeless, and this is in total communion with God. Now, the responsive level of the soul has a Hebrew word attached to it that's pronounced ruach. And ruach means breath or wind. Last week we looked at the energetic level of the soul that was called nephesh, and that is a being that breathes. And in this one, it's breath or wind. So you see a pattern developing there. This is mostly non-conscious, meaning most of this information that your responsive soul processes, you're not aware of. And it's centered primarily in the gut. And we'll talk some more about that in a few minutes, about how your gut and digestive system process emotions. This conveys emotional messages to all the other dimensions of the soul. So it's in contact through the integrative level with every level of your soul and processes and modulates emotions. Emotion then is the primary language this speaks. Last week we said the energetic level, the language is sensation, your senses picking up information. The responsive level adds emotion. Perception happens on this dimension. And what I mean by that is sensation is actually receiving the information. Say if you touch something soft, your hand realizes that that is a soft object. Your responsive level of the soul adds meaning to that and says, oh, this must be a stuffed animal, and adds a feeling to that. So this is perception, when you start to perceive what this is. It's not fully meaningful yet. That will come, but your first level of perceiving it is on your emotional level. This level of the soul is slow to change. Not nearly as slow as your physical level, because it may take years to learn the piano. But if you have emotions that you need to change and beliefs that you need to adjust, you can do so, but there's still some residual of that, and it takes a little effort to make those things change. So it is rather slow. And this is one aspect of the mind. And I said I'm opposed to the brain-only consciousness model. It says your brain is your mind, mind's a brain. No, your mind is part of all the different dimensions of your soul, and all those dimensions come together to create your mind. And this is the second aspect of what we call a feeling. A feeling is an emotion with a physical state connected to it. If you think about when you hear a song that you love to hear, it's inspirational, it makes you feel good, you have a physical sensation to go with the emotion. Those two things are tied together to start creating a feeling. Now, the responsive soul is mentioned in the Bible, and there's a passage in John 7 that has been kind of difficult to comprehend, but I'm going to go into some depth with this a little bit. Now, on the last and greatest day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, from within him will flow rivers of living water." And depending on the translation you read, it might say out of the belly of him, because the words within him literally mean that, out of the belly, meaning out of your gut that comes, which is kind of a hard concept to understand until you realize what the Jewish people thought about the way we process emotional information. In Psalm 51:6, it says, "Behold, you desire truth in the inward parts. You teach me wisdom in the inmost place." And in Proverbs 20:27, "The spirit of man is the candle of the Lord, searching all the inward parts." Well, this is the Hebrew version of the out of the belly of him. It's the inward parts, meaning hidden chambers of the belly. And chamber in the New Testament is translated inner room. When Jesus is talking about when you pray, go to your inner room, and when you close the door, pray. And in that culture, they didn't have a lot of closets, and they didn't have rooms on the inside except to protect things. But mostly the rooms were on the outside of the building where the wind could come through and make it more comfortable in there. So Jesus could have been talking about a physical building, but quite likely he's talking about his prayer shawl. When you pull it up over your head and wrap yourself in it, you're setting yourself apart from the rest of the world. The inward part is becoming manifest, and it's separate from the world. So the inner place, the inner chambers, are the part of you that express feelings, and they're not really words attached to it yet. It's just a feeling. So I love Proverbs 25, chapter 20, verse 5. "Counsel in the heart of man is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out." And one of the reasons we're looking at the different dimensions of the soul is to learn how to draw out that information so that you'll become more familiar with what's happening in your non-conscious levels of your soul. We talk about the gut brain. I mentioned that concept in the things to ponder. We're going to talk about that in some detail. Dr. Emerald Meyer in California has done a lot of research on how your gut, your digestive system, processes information and has a mind of its own. The digestive system, according to the research, has 100 million more neurons in your gut than you need for digestion. They're not there to digest, they do other things. And God created us very efficiently, so if there are 100 million more neurons there, they must be there for a reason. We'll talk about that in a second. 95% of all the serotonin in your body is in your gut, and serotonin modulates depression. Now, we would think that majority of serotonin would be in your mind because depression is a thing of the mind. It'd be up in your brain. No, it's in your gut. So if your gut produces the majority of the depression modulating chemical, that must say something. Also, too, your gut responds to every emotion you experience. We even have terms for this that we've been using for a long time. When you have a sudden emotional experience, people describe it as getting punched in the gut. I'm sick at my stomach over this. We've been saying this for a long time and starting to realize we really have been doing that. Your gut, your digestive system has been processing that information. Also, your vagus nerve, it's the main trunk nerve that goes from the gut to the brain. The connection between that is kind of interesting because the scientists had believed that your brain is telling your gut what to do in the rest of the body, therefore. But what's happening is more than 90% of all the signals on your vagus nerve are going from your gut to your brain, not vice versa. So your gut's literally telling your brain what to do. The brain sends signals to the gut, but the gut does all the work. It processes information, sends it back up for more processing, but your gut is in charge of that. And Dr. Meyer's book, The Mind-Gut Connection, is a fascinating read. So how the responsive soul works in real life, figuring out what this gut brain does, is your body senses information. That is your energetic physical soul. You process this information through an emotional lens. That is the responsive level of the soul that's centered in the gut, and your gut brain processes that information by adding an emotional component to it. So it's going on in large part in your gut, not in your head. You become aware of the process of this information when it's shaded by emotional responses. So you receive the information, you start processing it, an emotion is attached to it, and then sent on to the other dimensions of the soul. We'll talk about those in future lessons. And then you respond based on the processed information. And this is either accurate or inaccurate depending on the situation. How many times have you heard somebody say something and you weren't quite sure what they meant, but the more you think about it, the more negative it got, and pretty soon you have them hating you, and come to find out, no, it's not what they meant at all, but you process that information, adding negative emotions to it to create an idea that really wasn't there in the first place. That's a great example of how that works. Now, what does this mean for us? You receive information on the energetic level of your soul, and it's processed using a concept called response versus reaction. And knowing this concept will make a tremendous difference in how you interact with people and understand yourself. A reaction is acting on processed information without using all 5 dimensions of your soul. That it gets short-circuited on the energetic and responsive level and causes you to behave just based on those 2 levels without more understanding. A response is allowing the processed information to complete the path through all 5 dimensions of your soul, of allowing everything about you to inform what just happened and to make sense of it, and to realize it may not be as negative as you thought, it might be better than you thought, and you may have completely misunderstood it, but it requires all 5 dimensions to get there with that information. We are emotional creatures regardless of how intellectual we think we are. We cannot make decisions just based on information and data. We always process the information with emotions, and that changes our perception of it. The physical body can process that information. Your senses receive an abundance of information, and your gut adds an emotional component to it. So those 2 things do mix together. The reaction is short-circuiting at that point and doing everything else based on that. A response is going further by adding the other dimensions of the soul. By the time you are aware of the information, there has already been a lot of processing going on, and unless you short-circuited that and allowed behavior to happen without thinking about it, it takes a while for that to process. So give yourself time and a space between perception and response. And you know people who, when something happens, they just instantaneously get angry. They just erupt. Well, it's being short-circuited in that point and not being allowed to process. Now, things to ponder. What discussion topics bring up emotions in people? You think of politics and religion and their favorite sports team, because you mention their favorite football team and they light up. Mention their grandkids, they light up. So there are emotions that come up as a result of ideas or information that has been slightly processed within them. It creates an emotional response. That's why music is so effective at helping us change our emotions, because we don't need to do a lot of higher level processing, because we receive the physical information, our emotions are added to it with that song conveying a memory, an idea of what that feeling should be, and can rest at that point. It doesn't take a lot of higher level processing. Now, how does your physical state affect your emotions? Well, I talked in the last lesson about being hangry, that is, being hungry and irritable, and when you get something to eat, you feel better. So your physical state can affect your emotions because emotions require a lot of energy in order to process effectively. That's why when you've gone through a really emotionally strong, difficult situation, you feel exhausted afterward because your body has used so much energy. So your physical state, how much available energy you have and how you process that physically will make a tremendous difference on your emotional response. When we go to a church, you'll notice that almost all churches have either vaulted ceilings or a very high ceiling, because being in that physical space with a lot of room above your head creates a feeling that wouldn't be there if you had a regular 8 or 10 foot ceiling. So a lot of things that you experience create a different result based on what's going on with you physically. One of the things that I do when I'm meeting with people directly is I will almost always have a cup of hot tea in my hand, because science says that if one person or two people in a conversation have something warm to drink, the conversation usually flows better and people are more relaxed. So your physical state really can affect your emotions. And what does or doesn't make sense about the gut-brain concept? I would invite you to go to your favorite browser and favorite search engine and search gut brain and see what you find. There's a lot of information out there about that. And if you have questions, of course, you can go to the website, powerloveandmiracles.com, and you can send me a question through that as well. What I'd like you to do is to think about these 3 questions and see how these work in your life. Can you pick something out that happened to you that was a topic that brought up emotions? And what was it? What caused it? What did you do about it? And check your emotional and physical state throughout the day to say, how am I feeling right now? Feeling comfortable, relaxed, happy, sad, and how those things actually go together. And then do some more research on the gut-brain concept. Read Dr. Meyer's book, if you will, and find out more about how the gut brain, that brain in your digestive system, actually processes information on an emotional level. I want to thank you for joining me today for part 3 of What is the Soul? And I look forward to seeing you again on part 4 when we talk about the next level of the soul, which is the integrative level. But until then, thanks for being here. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. That way we can let you know when we have new classes coming online. Have a great day.